Hello viewers, I'm Ron Grant. Good evening and thank you so much for joining us. You're watching 284 Media out of Tortola in the Virgin Islands. The conversation of mental health has been one that has been at the forefront. Moreover, during the past few months, we've seen a number of incidents. As a matter of fact, the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force has seen, they say, an increase in incidents pertaining and involving persons with mental illness in the territory. All we can do is continue to have the conversation and bring as much awareness to the situation as possible. I'm honored to be joined once again by mental health expert Dr. June Samuel, who is the CEO and director of 5 Doctors Medical Center and Wellness. Of course, we are bringing to you the forefront of the matters that are of true importance to us here in the territory, and that happens to be mental health. All this and so much more after word from our sponsors. You're watching 284 Media.
Yo, everything good, Dad?
Aye. This thing got me one way, Daddy.
What do you mean?
Ever since I hook up with this thing, can't eat, I can't sleep. This is the first thing I touch it when I reach home.
What you really? Hey, this ain't like you, know.
Dad, this thing got me staying home, keeping out of trouble me.
Wow. What your name is?
Shit, I talking about my CCT life.
Don't worry about missing your favorite series, sports, news, and local programming. Come to CCT today and sign up for CCT Live to access over 80 channels. CCT Live. Bring it home.
1 month free trial, turn into 5. 5 months turn into, well, you know I huff. I watching ball. I been watching football. Dad, Nickelodeon, Paw Patrol. I am hooked. Hook, I tell you.
Viewers, welcome back and thank you so much for sticking with us once again. Dr. June Samuel, I want to thank you so much for your time. Welcome back to our 284 Media Studios.
Thank you, Ron. I'm always happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Now, of course, this evening you are joining us in a private capacity as CEO and director of 5 Doctors Medical Wellness Center. I want to get into the conversation because it seems as though more often, frequently perhaps, within the past couple of months, we've heard the conversation of situations and incidents pertaining to mental health in the territory. And when I say pertaining, it seems almost that we are in some way coming to conclusions on our own that persons are behaving in a certain manner because they are mentally unstable. I want to put this into perspective for the viewing audience. The Royal Virgin Islands Police Force, through our information from the news aspect, has continued to see an increase, they say, on situations and incidents pertaining or involving persons with mental illness, from the individual who walked around and smashed some 20-plus vehicles in the parking lot of the Dr. D. Orlando Smith Hospital, to an incident in Longbush where a lady had someone knock on her door and a mentally deranged man entered trying to assault her. Luckily and thankfully for her, persons nearby who heard her cry were able to come to her rescue. Unfortunately, both herself and the person who assisted her received injuries as a result of that. Now, the claims have long been said that you cannot officially charge someone who has been said to be clinically mentally ill. So
Right.
the reason I bring that up is because while the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force is saying we're seeing an increase in these incidents pertaining to persons with mental health and mental illness, we also see on the flip side where many of these persons are being charged. So my question to you, right off the bat, are we coming to our own conclusions, not only as a public, but from a law enforcement aspect, that many of these persons suffer from mental illness, perhaps when they are actually not?
So thanks for that, Ron. I think one of the things that we suffer with here in the BVI, and it's not unique to us, there's a whole stigma around mental health and mental illness. And because of that stigma, the stigma comes from a place where we have in our minds what persons who we presume to be mentally ill would look like. And for us, they look like individuals who are behaving in a way that is aggressive or unusual. And we know, those of us who work in mental health, we understand very well that the percentage of persons who are actually violent who also have a mental health disorder is a very, very small percentage, and it is usually in specific types of instances. So what I would say is that we must not, and we need to stop making assumptions about persons' mental health situation, just based on behaviors that we may see. There are many other kinds of medical issues that can cause someone to be aggressive, be violent. And so very often these persons, as the police did in the one instance, need to be evaluated to make an assessment of what really is happening with the individual. So just as an education point,
Yes.
for all of us, do not assume that persons who are mentally ill or have mental health disorders may behave or look a particular way. Mental health concerns all of us, right? Once you're a human being and you're alive and you have a brain that works, you should be concerned about your mental health.
Understood. Now, when we look across our community, it's rare that you can go to a supermarket without being bombarded by someone who appears, again, to be mentally
Unwell.
challenged.
Right.
Okay. Persons, again, have been reporting a number of cases, women being approached in a very uncomfortable manner, some
Right.
sitting in their vehicles. So if we're not coming to the conclusion that all of these persons suffer from mental illness of some form, as a
Right.
community, I want to talk about our reaction, because in many cases I think that we have a mixture of reactions at this point. Some persons are just sick and tired of it. They're unbothered.
Right.
They have put up somewhat of a block when it comes to the conversation. Then you have a large percentage of persons who are beginning to feel very uncomfortable, very unsafe as residents. How should we be reacting to these varying scenarios?
Well, I think one of the things that it's important for us to do is to have an understanding of what the problem really is. So we have individuals in the community who may have, substance abuse issues. They may have coexisting mental health issues, or they may have other kinds of challenges that, from a social perspective, has placed them at a disadvantage. And one of the gaps within in our overall system is the ability to meet individuals' social needs in the way that we ought to, and social support. So some persons are homeless. They have no fixed places where they're living. They may not be working. And of course, you will see, remembering that we're in this pandemic that's still going on, this is one of the follows from the pandemic as well. So persons who may have just been, barely surviving are now not surviving at all. And it's showing up in these social situations where persons have to, beg for food, or they're begging for money, or they're just not taking care of themselves because they really can't help it. So one of the things I think as a community, we need to ask ourselves, how can we help, right? We have organizations within the community. We need to look at how we can do more outreach. How can our churches come together and provide safe spaces that persons can go to during the day and have their basic needs met. The basic needs are food and clothing and some shelter, right? We have service organizations within the community. What can we do to meet that need? Because there's a specific need that is more in our face now because of what has happened with the pandemic, right? So that's from a community perspective what I think we need to try to advocate for. Very often we have, this approach that we feel that, okay, government needs to fix it. But the truth is, government can't fix all of these social ills, right? So, there, like I said before, there are many other ways that these needs can be met. And I think we need to start and continue to have the conversations about how we go about doing that.
I am very happy that you mentioned the fact, and I do agree with you, that oftentimes the government is looked to for just about everything and wanting
Right.
to find a solution for everything. However, holistically, specifically with this conversation, there are a number of organizations that essentially can help to fill that gap.
Right.
On a social level, we do know of some public organizations who tend to offer that service. For example, Safe Haven.
Right.
We also know that these said establishments and agencies are overextended as they are. So
Right.
where do we as a community, you mentioned churches, there's also the Christian Council, there are a number of organizations that can essentially come together and fill a gap. I want to give some examples of that because you mentioned shelter.
Right.
On a weekend, perhaps a Saturday or Sunday, what about soup kitchens? What about offering perhaps
Exactly.
food at a specific time at a specific location so these persons who know they are in need can essentially come to that location and get some assistance. When it comes to shelter as well, we have persons who are in some cases more financially well off than others. And what are we looking at when it comes to really assisting? I
Right.
need to talk about trauma. We are in the era,
Right.
and I say the era because this space that we're in as a world is quite difficult. Of course, when we look at the pandemic for the past few years, many persons are traumatized. I'm concerned, and you may disagree with me or not, that our society is in some way becoming traumatized by the events of persons who may or may not be affected by mental health. How are we able to deal with that as a society? The trauma from effects. A female is sitting in her car at a supermarket and she's attacked, she is bombarded with inhumane treatment. How are we dealing with that trauma as a result of the fact that we haven't been able to make ourselves available as a community to help?
So for situation and specific circumstances where persons are traumatized. So you mentioned some specific examples, but we could also think, for example, of out of the pandemic or during when we had our periods of lockdown, you
Yes.
had increasing incidences reported of domestic violence issues, which in itself is traumatic as well. So, there may be specific instances where persons are traumatized by being exposed to, the behaviors of individuals in the community who, for one reason or the other, may be behaving in a way that is threatening and aggressive. It would be important for those individuals that have been affected to seek out services for themselves, right? And we also have to remember that, as you mentioned, because we're all traumatized, we're kind of doubly traumatized now because we've gone through the hurricanes, now the pandemic. So situations that we may have coped well with before, we may not be coping as well with those situations. And so it is key for persons to be aware that if they've been exposed to situations that are traumatic, they should seek services out for themselves so that they don't then become a victim themselves from suffering from the effects of the trauma.
As a medical director of your own establishment, of course, 5 Doctors Medical Wellness Center, I want to ask you, how has the response been? Do you oftentimes see persons coming and seeking professional help on their own, or is it a case where they're usually referred?
So I have a combination of both, and I would have to say over the last 6 months, I have seen an uptick in requests for services. And, more persons are savvy now to this whole discussion about mental health. And I think more persons are becoming more and more aware. We're aware that we're stressed. We're aware that we don't feel as well as we normally would. We're aware that we're not coping as well as we should. We're not sleeping well at night. So the majority of the persons who seek out services at my office are self-referred.
Okay.
And it may come about because they've heard a program here, for example. They've heard me here, or they've heard a program on the radio. There've been a number of education and awareness sessions done by different groups in various spaces, at churches, at schools. So persons I would say are more aware now that they themselves may be suffering from the effects of trauma one way or the next, and they're presenting for services. And based on my reports from colleagues that I work with as well, they're also seeing an uptick. So, the services are available. It's important for persons to take the initiative, just like how if you don't feel well physically, you would go to the doctor and get checked. If you find that you're not sleeping well, you're not eating well, you feel sad a lot, you're feeling anxious, you should get it checked out. And avail yourself to the services. And then you might want to ask, well, for those of us, for our family members, because, the reports from the police, a lot of times it's about these people who seem to, out of the blue, may be exhibiting unusual behaviors. But oftentimes, we see the changes in our family members.
Correct.
Right? And we have to pay attention. If you notice persons are behaving differently, one of the types of programs that I've been trying to push quite a bit is, for example, EAP programs within workplaces. We should be encouraging our employees to be checking for themselves, and we should be keeping an eye out and approaching persons because again, Ron, because of the stigma, we feel that we can't speak to persons if they seem like they're behaving strangely.
Right.
But very often persons are appreciative if you come up and say, I noticed that you don't seem to be yourself recently. You're behaving a little bit differently. You're more irritable. Do you want to talk about it? Do we need to take you somewhere to talk to somebody? And that shows support. It shows that we care about the persons that we are around. So, as individuals in our own spaces, we should also be reaching out to those around us and the persons in our homes. And
Understood.
let's not forget the children.
I was just going to ask you about the children. We've seen a number of cases, videos of students having a difficult time with their discipline and behavior across the Virgin Islands. But I want to look at it from a different vantage point. What are the conversations? What would you say to parents of children as young as toddlers, who are exhibiting behaviors and seeing different types of behaviors within their community? How can they begin those conversations, and what should they be really tackling when it comes to our youth? Because I essentially see that there is an overall lack of empathy. There is overall a lack of humility among our youth, and I think that those conversations, perhaps in some cases, are not being had, in addition to perhaps they're not seeing those types of examples that exhibit a positive aspect to those behaviors. What should we be doing, and how can we engage our youth from the home?
So what I would say is, again, it goes back to parents and teachers and persons who deal with children and young people being aware. I think one of the things that we are underestimating is the effect that this pandemic and all that has been associated with it is having on our children and young people. There's several studies out there that basically tell us that children are exhibiting the effects of the trauma differently. So they're more agitated, they're not settling in school, they're not focusing as well as they should on their schoolwork, and they're just generally unsettled and not necessarily doing well. So we need to advocate, I would say, for programs in various spaces. I believe that we should have intervention programs in all of our schools, that is integrated in the school, that's intentionally done, so that we begin to identify the children who may not be doing well, children who have fallen between the cracks. those children who were on the edge before academically may now actually have fallen over the edge, and we need to recognize early that it may not have anything to do with their ability to learn, but it's just the effect of what they've been through as it relates to the pandemic. And the same thing, parents at home, we have to recognize, we should be having conversations with our children regularly, okay? We need to intervene on the devices, right? So we should be checking to see what they're doing on these devices, who they're speaking to, what kinds of programs they're playing. Should be monitoring their chats, right? Because that's sometimes, children will not say anything, but if you're monitoring what they're doing, then you will begin to pick up the cues that they're not doing well. And then, work with the guidance counselors within the schools, in terms of having the intervention with the children. If you yourself as a parent, if you're uncomfortable about having those kinds of conversations. And there are several, different services available here for children. We should avail ourselves freely to the services. Do not assume that your children are doing well.
Thank you so much for your honesty. Dr. Samuel, I want to thank you so much for once again taking time out of your very busy schedule. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Before we close, I do want to give you an opportunity for persons who may not know about your services at 5 Doctors Medical Wellness Center. Can you kindly provide some information if they are interested in getting in contact with your medical center, where you're located, as well as your contact information?
Okay, so at 5 Doctors Medical and Wellness Center, we provide services for both children and adults. And I have several practitioners who work with me in different areas. And we're located in Port Purcell at Cedar House. And the telephone number is 345-1591 or 494-1317.
Wonderful viewers, that is all the time we have. Let us continue to have the conversation so we can increase awareness on the state of mental health in the Virgin Islands. I'm Ron Grant. You've been watching To It For Media. Thank you so much for your time.